Let's answer some questions. G'day guys, Tommy here, and the other week I put out a tweet to give a Q&A video a try, and got a few questions in, so let's give you guys some answers. First one up is from Uncle Chunt, who asks, do you dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? Sounds to me like Uncle Chunt's a bit nuts. He probably wants to be a bit nuts. Well then, Uncle Chunt, you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts. I wonder if Michael Keaton really is going to be Batman again. I haven't watched the Tim Burton Batman in a while. I should watch it again. I wasn't fully into Returns though. Next one up comes from Goffioso. Goffioso actually sent a few in, but this one says, how many guitars do you own and which is your favourite? It depends, because sometimes people include bass guitars and sometimes people don't. If you include bass guitars, it's 4, but if you don't include bass guitars, it's 3. The bass is a Tobias Deluxe 4. I did have an old Samick years ago back from my band days, but I since decided years ago that I wanted to upgrade from it, hence the Tobias, which is a phenomenal bass. But in terms of guitars, there is my Fender Stratocaster in the Candy Apple Red. They did do a colour where it wasn't candy red or apple red. They made this hybrid with metallic flakes in it, and they called it Candy Apple Red. That's mine. And everyone has seen that guitar. It's been in the Speedball 2 guitar video. It was used for the Shinobi 3 guitar video. It was used for the little clip in the Musha Les video. But other than that, there is a Les Paul Custom Pro, an Epiphone one. Interesting thing about that is it's got pro-buckers in it instead of normal humbuckers. It's got coil tapping volume controls. So when you click them out, they go from humbucker to sort of like a single coil. The other one is my Epiphone ES175D VS. Arch top and back F-holes, vintage sunburst, that's what the VS stands for, D for the dual because of dual pickups. I believe it's got Alnico 57s in it, humbuckers. And of all the guitars, the ES175D is my favourite. In actual fact, I bought the Strat, then the ES, then the Les Paul. When I bought the Strat, I was actually looking for an ES175D. They didn't have one. But I got offered a great deal on the Strat, so I took that. But the very next year, or just under a year I think, I found the ES175D, and so I had to buy it. Everyone knows that I'm a massive Yes fan, and my favourite guitarist of all time is Steve Howe. And he's synonymous with that guitar. So of course I had to have one, and people always ask me, what's your dream guitar? And I always sit there and say an ES175D, and they say, what's your favourite guitar in your collection? And I tell them an ES175D, and they look at me shocked, because quite often you don't hear a lot of people say they own their dream guitar. Well, I happen to own mine. Next question comes from great mate Stewie's Retro Gaming. And Stewie asks, you've been given a bag of cash and asked to design a game with an accessory to play said game. What type of game would it be and what accessory? Now this one took a little bit of time for me to think about because I just couldn't come up with something that wasn't done. Growing up in the arcade pinball coin-op world, you've seen everything done. Even if it's not well known, you've seen it done. And the idea I had actually came from being on the phone the other week with a friend of mine that's a vendor. Now, he was repairing a Whirlwind pinball machine. On top of the head box of the machine is a fan. He was repairing the fan. The motor burned out of it, I think. And that gave me the idea. A Sonic game with a fan accessory. Not 2D Sonic, 3D. So, say like a Sonic Adventure style game, or even a Boost Formula 1, like the 3D sections of Sonic Generations or something like that, where you got 3D Sonic, but you have a fan aimed at you, synced up with the console, that blows the air in your face, so it feels like you're traveling with Sonic. Something like that. Otherwise, the only thing I can think of, I guess, is maybe having a gasoline-soaked basketball hoop that sets on fire every time that you set the hoop on fire in NBA Jam, I guess. Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Stewie. Next up, we return to... Here's another question from great mate Goffioso, who asks, aside from the soundtrack to Musha, what are some of your other favourite video game soundtracks? This one was tricky. This one was really tricky. I could not really make up a condensed list because it was just going to be too long, and that was just looking at the Mega Drive games, let alone everything else. But we'll give it a go. Speaking of Musha, two games come to mind. One is Dragon's Fury, aka Devil's Crush, because both the soundtrack to Musha and Dragon's Fury were done by dear friend Toshiaki Sakota. And Dragon's Fury Devil's Crush is getting a vinyl record release. So check that out. Also, speaking of Musha, GGLS 2 on the Game Gear. That's my favourite 8-bit soundtrack. And that's a Game Gear game. I really struggle with 8-bit soundtracks. But the soundtrack to GGLS 2 is wonderful. Fantastic soundtrack. Of course, I have to mention, I've done guitar video on it, Shinobi 3. I absolutely love the soundtrack to Shinobi 3. Unpopular opinion is going to piss people off. I actually prefer Shinobi 3's soundtrack over Revenge of Shinobi soundtrack. Yeah. I'm going to get some hate for that one. Speaking of Shinobi, Shadow Dancer on the Mega Drive, that's got a great soundtrack. Speaking of shoot 'em ups, you have to mention Thunder Force, especially Thunder Force 3 and 4. Of course, I've got to mention another shoot 'em up, that Gainao, Ginu, Wings of War. That's got a sensational soundtrack. Also, things like Beyond Oasis, speaking of Yuzo Koshiro. Beyond Oasis is a wonderful soundtrack. It almost sounds like it should accompany a swashbuckling movie starring Errol Flynn and Tyrone Power. Also, speaking of Yuzo Koshiro, you have to mention Streets of Rage 1 and 2. Also, talking about action-adventure RPGs, Light Crusader by Treasure has a wonderful soundtrack. I love that game, Light Crusader. Isometric, doesn't get a lot of love. I don't even think it got a lot of love even back in '95 when it came out. I reckon it's quite an overlooked game. I've beaten it twice now, and I love that game. Fantastic soundtrack. Also, another one that stands out to me is on the Mega Drive called Jewel Master, because it takes its names from progressive rock staples like Close to the Edge and Fish Out of Water and In the Dead of Night by UK. Love that soundtrack purely for that, and it's a good soundtrack too. Also, another one I really want to point out, a game that doesn't get a lot of love on the Mega Drive, is the Ooze. It's a top-down game, almost in a way like Chaos Engine, but not shooting. You're a puddle of ooze and you can punch and spit. That's got a great soundtrack, particularly, funny enough, the track that plays in the options menu. Probably the best track in the game. Sadly, it's just in the options menu, so it gets forgotten about. Of course, I have to mention the Sonic games. Just the whole series in general has standouts. Also, in the world of Sega, I have to mention Final Fight CD. I prefer the Final Fight CD over the arcade soundtrack. Really do. Also, speaking of the Mega CD, and also on the Amiga, I have a lot of memories playing this game on the Amiga, and I did borrow someone's Mega CD copy ages ago, and I love this game. I used to play it as a little kid on my uncle's Amiga. It's a game that doesn't get a lot of love. Wolfchild. Wolfchild has got different soundtracks. There's the Amiga one, then there's the Mega CD one, then there's the Genesis one, because the game only came out in Japan and America on the Mega Drive / Genesis. Then there was a Super Nintendo one as well. But I really love the Amiga soundtrack and the Mega CD soundtrack. Awesome soundtracks, and I just love that game a lot. I really do have a big soft spot for Wolfchild. It is a great game. It doesn't get a lot of love these days. I don't know why, but Wolfchild. Speaking of the Amiga, also Jim Power and Mutant World. That's a really cool game, and it's got an awesome soundtrack. Yeah. Also on the Amiga, Yo-Jo sticks out. And of course, now I've done a guitar video. You got to mention Bitmap Brothers games. They've always got, killer soundtracks. Also, I have to mention on the Mega Drive, Batman. When I heard that soundtrack, when I played that game, I must have been about 7 or 8 years old when I got Batman on the Mega Drive. So I've been playing it ever since I was a little kid. You could always tell with the games I played up to that point that you could tell that they were video game music. You could tell that, it was chiptune, although I didn't know what the term chiptune was. But when I heard the soundtrack to Batman, I could not believe that a soundtrack like that was coming out of the Mega Drive. That soundtrack is incredible, and it doesn't sound like a video game soundtrack at all. That soundtrack is fantastic. Axis Chemical Factory. Then you've got the level with the Batplane and the Batmobile. Awesome. whole soundtrack is just, oh, it's so good. I prefer the Mega Drive Batman over the NES Batman, both made by Sunsoft. Don't want to know anything about the NES one. I'm just sticking to the Mega Drive one. The Mega Drive one is so awesome. Then of course I have to mention real quickly some arcade standouts. You have to mention Street Fighter 2, various versions. For instance, I didn't like Guile's theme until the Mega Drive version, where they changed the key. And then Super Street Fighter 2 came out, and they put it in the same key as the Mega Drive one. Up until then, I always thought Guile's theme sounded flat until the Mega Drive and Super Street Fighter 2. Then I thought, oh yeah, they've done it up. But you know, of course, Vega's theme, Ryu, Ken. You've got to mention Street Fighter 2. Also, speaking of awesome arcade soundtracks, another game that doesn't get a lot of love, the arcade Battletoads has got a kick-ass soundtrack. I played Battletoads, the arcade game, years and years ago. I'm talking like 1999 I played it. Along with Battle Circuit. I believe both cabinets were sitting next to each other when I played it at a school fete. Yeah, I think I've told this story before. The Battletoads is a kick-ass soundtrack. It's a kick-ass arcade game. Then, speaking of beat-em-ups, I've got to mention two others. I have to mention Armored Warriors. I've done a playthrough of it. Great game with an awesome soundtrack. That game's got a really awesome soundtrack with some progressive rock nods. Of course, I've got to mention Knights of the Round purely because I kept making connections between that soundtrack and the music of Focus. And then also another arcade game that doesn't get a lot of attention nowadays, and it's a shame because it's a really cool beat 'em up with an awesome soundtrack, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. That game is really cool and it's got an awesome soundtrack. So yeah, also, I've got to mention, speaking of arcade, but not the arcade version, the Mega CD version of NBA Jam, and also the PlayStation and Saturn and PC version of Tournament Edition has got an awesome soundtrack as well. Have to mention that. Oh, and that's remind me also, just real quick, there's a game on the Mega Drive by Konami. It is a basketball game. It's called Hyper Dunk. Now, I had this game when I was a kid, and I still have my copy to this day. That game is the epitome of the 90s. It's got this full-on 90s soundtrack, and it just oozes 90s. Go look it up, Hyper Dunk on the Mega Drive. In America, it was called Double Dribble because it was Konami trying to bring back the Double Dribble name. But they renamed it Hyper Dunk here. Wait till you see the intro, unless you have epilepsy, because there's horrible flashes in it. And when they introduce the teams, I might have to do a playthrough of that game on here because it's just so fucked up. But anyway, I hope that answers your question, Goff, on that one. Last question comes from Goffioso once again, and he asks, what is your most treasured piece in your gaming collection? There's a bit of trouble with this question because there's more than one, and we'd be here for ages. Of course, everyone knows how much Musha means to me. I mean, I did a whole 50-minute feature on that game. No, I could say Puppet, or stuff like that, but I guess the only thing that really comes to mind that really sits with that, that really comes to mind, I guess, you always go about my original copy of Sonic 2 and the Mega Drive itself and all this and all that. I guess the only thing really that has well, there's just too many. Well, I'll say this one because I showed some of this stuff on episode 14 of the Sim Spacey show that I guested on. But there is one that I've never brought up that does mean a lot. There's this small collection of games. I think I still have the photo because there's too much to drag out. Now, that just looks like a generic small collection. The only things that might stand out are the consoles, the 2 books, I guess Alicia Dragoon, because that's starting to get a little bit pricey now. But it just looks like standard Mega Drive and Master System titles. Those were actually my cousin Jamie's. That was Jamie's video game collection. We lost Jamie last year. Jamie committed suicide, and I got given his games collection. And there was things in there. I remember like his original copy of Sonic 1. He had a copy of Columns. I know I got his copy of Wonder Boy. Alicia Dragoon was in there. Also a game called Gunship, which was kind of like a Choplifter rip-off in a way, from memory. I know he had Spy vs Spy. I know he had Secret Command. I think he had Action Fighter there. And those 2 books. So in recent years they've become special. But anyways, thanks for the questions, guys. I hope they're decent enough answers. And other than that, I think I better let you guys go. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you later. I prefer Final Fight CD over the Mega Drive. No, not the Mega Drive, the arcade. What am I saying? I prefer that over the arcade one. Final Fight didn't come out in the Mega Drive.